said, I know this is a really exciting subject matter, but especially you kids, don't just run out there and start eating everything in sight, because a few of the plants are poisonous. Not many, just a few, but you got to know what you're dealing with. So watch the DVD really closely, study it, learn the things that you absolutely know are good for you, and then start with those. All right? Have a good one. This is Marcus Rothkranz. There is no excuse for not being able to afford food or health care, because the healthiest food and medicine on the planet is free. It's all natural and is growing right outside your house and around your neighborhood. People from all walks of life are discovering the amazing health and longevity benefits of eating wild and garden foods. This epic documentary will open your eyes to a new way of looking at and appreciating nature. Everything has a purpose. There are no such things as weeds. They are loving gifts from God with some of the most healing medicinal properties imaginable. They are food and medicine, and they are free. The more you pick them, the more they grow. Food that regenerates itself. This is a true miracle. It doesn't matter if you live in an apartment in the city or a house in the suburbs. You can heal and feed yourself. A company featured in this documentary, Edible Landscaping, can ship you ready-to-go edible plants and potted fruit trees, herb trees, nut trees, avocados, kiwis, anything you can imagine. Many of them already have fruit on them. The more you live directly off nature, the healthier you will be, and it doesn't cost anything. It also isn't boring and tasteless. Amazing recipes are popping up everywhere, with meals, snacks, and desserts being made from wild harvested foods. People eating these wild raw foods quickly find their health problems disappearing, many of them for good. And with that, I present to you the new revolution.
They're actually not only more effective than pharmaceutical medications, but they actually work faster.
And it will heal anything that it touches.
Anywhere in the world you go, there's always going to be fresh, wild food growing.
One section like this can feed a family of 4. Quite high in protein.
These are ready to eat.
300 times more vitamin C than oranges.
I live in the Philippines.
And I'm from Australia.
I'm here to make a change and be the change.
I manage some of the biggest casinos, believe it or not, in the world. My thinking started to change, and I had to be part of the natural world.
I spent 13 years working in mainstream medicine.
We didn't want to be able to depend on outside sources to survive.
I lived off of wild foods that grew in my neighborhood, and I was extremely healthy. I couldn't believe how good I felt.
I feel better than I've ever felt in my life.
Nettles are very, very high in protein.
It has tons of polysaccharides.
And you just feel this stuff going to town in your body. It's like this power. You eat the flowers, you eat the leaves.
So the chaparral will do that with cancer cells as well. It helps prevent those cancer cells from actually dividing.
Very, very high in the omegas as well.
Your body will start saying, I want more of that. That was pretty cool.
Not only do they have the chlorophyll, which chelates to any kind of toxins we might be storing in our fat cells and eliminates it through our urine.
And I was finding that these things were working so much better than mainstream medicine.
Pawpaw leaf extract was put in Petri dishes with live cancer cells and human cells. The cancer cells died. The human cells were fine.
Alkaloids, saponins, glycosides, terpenes. We've got a whole pharmacy all around us, no matter where you go. You can be in the middle of the desert, you can be up here in the mountains.
We are just walking through the neighborhood now, and we have come across nettles, which are one of the most healthiest things that someone can eat and juice.
When it comes to these wild edibles, it's almost like an undiscovered continent.
Egyptians called this the plant of immortality.
You can grow this indoor, outdoor, pretty much anywhere in the world you can grow this.
It tonifies the whole reproductive system.
You can use the bark as a laxative on the mulberry tree, and the leaves themselves are an amylase inhibitor, so they block the breakdown of carbohydrates into simple sugars, so they actually act as a diet aid.
I released 160 pounds from beginning this lifestyle. I used to be nearly 300 pounds.
We're going to take men down there, and we're going to see what men can find to eat just growing wild.
It's really good for the liver.
Very popular in the health food industry.
Regenerates new cells, regenerates all the things that you need to fight anything that might be in your system, any disease, any virus.
Wildcrafted basically means we go out here in nature and we get the herbs that we need from nature. You can apply it to psoriasis, eczema, dermatitis, different skin afflictions like that. Works really, really well for those.
It means to alter blood chemistry, to alkalize the blood.
For nerve function and brain, it's powerful. You eat just a little bit of this stuff, and you can just feel it going to work like immediately.
And that's why we're talking about these foods being so amazing, all these wild foods, because they're all biogenic.
This is one of the only plants that actually has essential fatty acids that's on land.
So it helps to increase blood flow to the brain, increases ATP in the brain tissue, which is adenosine triphosphate, helps the cells to function properly. So it's one of the best memory boosters out there, and also they found it helps prevent stroke damage. You can take this white latex and you can apply it to warts, moles, skin cancers, things like that. It helps to eat them off.
You're being empowered of what are the superfoods from your own area.
You can't go wrong with a native plant because they grow here anyway.
You can grow these almost anywhere. You don't have to have a farm. You don't even have to have a garden. You can grow these in a container.
In one little plot of land, instead of having just tomatoes, you've got these 7 layers.
You will be amazed at how much food you can get out of a small place.
I had taught myself all this. It's fun. It's not like a big deal. There's so much potential for food. It's unbelievable.
And if anybody studies Hippocrates Health Institute and Ann Wigmore, you'll find that you can grow just about everything inside the house, which she did in Boston for many years.
This is one of the most nutritious foods on the planet. It has amazing amounts of B12.
I would say look out goji berry, because I think these things will be the next big kick in the health food industry.
This is one plant that if I was stuck with and I didn't know what else to consume, for me to consume this for a whole month, no problem at all.
You can survive on these very well.
Wild plants, wild edibles, all of them are superfoods.
You can even eat the flowers. You can eat all parts of this.
They found it effective against 6 different forms of cancer, including breast cancer.
Superfood and superfood, hey. And there they are, and free.
The date fruit is one of the #1 muscle building foods for strengthening the tendons and the muscles.
What's unique about this is that these glycones stay intact until they hit your kidneys, then they split, releasing the hydroquinone, which is your antiseptic, and that's going to kill your urinary tract infection. So it's very, very specific to the urinary tract. It's not going to cause secondary infections the way antibiotics will kill off the good bacteria. This doesn't. So you're going to find that the wild-crafted plants are not only cleaner than organic plants, but they're actually much stronger. One capsule, I had a friend who had really severe menstrual cramps. I used to make this up for. One capsule would knock out her menstrual cramps for about 10 hours.
If you eat this food, then you never have to pay for a supplement or a vitamin.
It's amazing how just being out in the wild, in the nature, teaches you so much.
Most people have some of this growing on their lawn. Wherever there's dandelion, there's usually plantain.
All parts of this are edible.
This one's very common. A lot of people may have it in their gardens.
This is what you should be eating.
Lewis and Clark, when they went across the Americas, they lived on these things.
They're so good for you.
I felt 100 times better than I ever felt eating even the best organic food from the health food store.
You go to a grocery store and you pay money and you get something, and then you worked hard for that money, and then you eat the food and then it's gone and your money's gone. But this, it's like you come out, this didn't cost me anything.
There is 100 or 200 superfoods that are growing right in your climate there. And that to me is exciting because one is that they're much more affordable, they're free.
Why do we feel that we have to pay lots of money for stuff that's good for us? The more we pay, it's better for us? It's usually the other way around.
What I need is here.
Our food source, water source, everything is right here.
It provides a lot of food for us. We can get a couple of thousand of hardy kiwis, and when I say hardy, these take winters 20 below zero.
And nature just hands it to you on a plate, and it doesn't cost you anything.
Every single plant in here is edible, can be used in your food preparation. It can also be used for medicines.
Creates a very soothing compound for your throat, your sinuses, your bladder, your intestines. This one's a very powerful antiseptic. It's going to kill viruses, bacteria, fungus. You can use it for toothache or arthritic pains. You have a case of pneumonia, bronchitis, things like that. Pine needles are excellent for that.
So when you start eating raw foods, you don't have to learn how many carbs you're eating or how many calories or how many proteins or enzymes or any of that stuff.
I never thought I could grow pomegranates in Virginia, but I am.
This is way better than wheatgrass.
So this is our dandelion acorn quiche, and this is a hawthorn berry pie.
There's actually edible dogwoods. This is called a cornelian cherry.
All this stuff that just grew wild, that looks like weeds for people, is just a whole mixture, a smorgasbord of food and medicine.
And it's a complete protein. You've got all 8 essential amino acids right here in the greens.
A lot of people only have shade in their yard, and this will grow in full shade.
The roots can go down 128 feet for a little tiny plant that's only this big. You can imagine what the plant is doing. What's it bringing back?
Okay, so this is a weed.
It is a weed.
Show it to me. Put your hand on it. That's a weed called poke.
Yes.
Herbs are medicine. Everything we need to keep ourselves healthy and to fight disease and stuff, it's right out here in nature. It's just a matter of you got to learn what's what.
This tree in its lifetime will produce literally hundreds of thousands of almonds. hundreds of thousands.
It only makes sense that if you're going to go through all the work to have a landscaped yard, you might as well have stuff that you can eat.
It's free, it doesn't cost anything, and it's the best food on the planet.
This is the way to go, to eat directly from the real foods, and you'll never have to worry about health care.
The way it is with the world, the way it is, we need to be thinking local, and we need to bring into our lives the memory of the land that we're on. Food is nature's way of giving us memory about who we are and why we're here.
From Canada to the Arizona desert, from Virginia to Nevada, this might be one of the most eye-opening, educational, inspiring videos you might ever see. It will change the way you think about nature, food, health, and medicine. People keep asking me how to harvest and prepare wild foods and herbs like it's some mysterious process. This isn't rocket science, folks. For most plants, you just take the thing, you put it in your mouth, and you eat it. It's really not that difficult, especially the flowers and leaves. Now, I know many plants are very bitter, and you probably don't want to eat them straight. And also, most people don't chew their food enough, so you wouldn't get much out of the plant that way anyway. The best way I recommend is simply to put everything in a blender with something sweet like coconut water, fruit, figs, or dates, and anything else you have like celery and cucumber. Obviously, you can juice them, you can put them in your salads, you can make tea with them, or dry them and powder them for long-term storage. You can dry them in your home or in some shady spot outside or even in a dehydrator, but you don't need a dehydrator. Just wait a couple of weeks and they'll dry anyway. Then put them in a coffee grinder to make the powder. If it's big or hard stuff like roots and stems, you might want to put them in a Vitamix first to break it down, then a coffee grinder to make it finer. That's a lot of work for some people, so that's why I made the ready-to-go powders and formulas from wild herbs like my liver formula, which contains dandelion, milk thistle, burdock, choncapiedra, and other great stuff. You can grow your own plants in your yard, your patio, or even inside your home with some daylight spectrum bulbs. A lot of people do that who live in apartments or in the city. And if you're growing wild plants, you never run out because they grow like weeds. There are a few plants you cannot eat right off the plant because they have powerful resins or they need to be harvested at a certain time of year and not others. So that's why I made this video to acquaint you with some of the main ones in the different climates from desert to mountain. The basic rule is to start with the plants you know and then expand your knowledge base from there. All dandelions, thistles, and grasses are edible. That's a great start. Mallow and plantain are everywhere worldwide and they are two of the best things you can consume. To get you started, here's what I had for breakfast this morning. I simply woke up, went outside, where every morning I am greeted by an amazing assortment of fresh new wild plants. I eat the yellow dandelion type flowers right there on the spot. They are one of the highest sources of lecithin in the world. Then I pick a bunch of stuff, mostly leaves, some stems, and even some roots. Then I take it inside, just simply rinse it off, put it in my Vitamix blender, and add whatever I have around. Today I opened some coconuts, and use the sweet water, which is really high in potassium and electrolytes, and also celery, cucumber, some pineapple for sweetness and enzymes, and some dates. Every day it's a little different based on what I have lying around. Fennel, I'm starting to really like fennel. It's really good for digestion. Stuff tastes great. Here, have a bite. Oh! Blending is the best because it helps break open all the cells, making all that awesome nutrition available for your body to use with very little digestion needed. It's really not that hard, folks. And then I have enough to fill these glass jars, which I then take with me all day wherever I go. So I've got breakfast, lunch, and dinner. It's on the go. I don't have to cook food, make food. This is about probably the most nutritious thing you could have. And it's portable. This is the way to go. Kid, I grew up on a farm and I couldn't even go near the animals because I had allergies, asthma, bronchitis, hay fever, emphysema. My whole respiratory system was messed up. I got colds, flus, fevers, constant infections. I was a mess. My dad worked with all kinds of toxic substances like turpentine, tractor oil, gasoline, and then he liked his beer and vodka at the end of the day, which messed up his liver. He had so many toxins in his blood it pushed out through his skin, so he had really bad eczema and psoriasis. My mom started having arthritis and rheumatism. We were messed up. And my job, since I couldn't go near the animals, get this, was to go out there and cut down the weeds, the thistles, the nettles, the burdock, the dandelions. Little did I know that those very plants that I was fighting to cut down were the ones that could have healed us all. Dandelions are better for you than anything you have in the refrigerator. They are a superfood and a natural medicine. Aside from being a complete food with all 8 essential amino acids that make protein, dandelions are a strong blood cleanser, liver cleanser. They dissolve kidney stones, they help acne, cholesterol, they prevent cancer, they reduce gastrointestinal problems, problems, and even diabetes. The yellow flower is one of the highest sources of lecithin in the world, even more than soy. And burdock, that's that plant that has those little round Velcro balls that sticks to your clothes and your hair. Little did we know that that's one of the world's top 10 healing herbs. It's a very popular anti-inflammatory, antibacterial, antifungal, anti-tumor. It cleans the blood so well, it makes it one of the world's great skin cleansers. It removes acids from the blood, which makes it great for eczema and psoriasis. It balances hormones, arthritic, and gland problems. And milk thistle. Thistles. All thistles are edible. Milk thistle is that tall herb with the spiky, sharp leaves, and it contains that white, milky-like liquid that, by the way, if you put that on moles, warts, or skin cancer, it helps dissolve it away. Milk thistle is one of the best things you can take for liver. It helps cure hepatitis as well as cirrhosis of the liver. The seeds contain a substance called silymarin, which coats and guards the liver cells by preventing toxic materials from entering the cells and helps rebuild and regrow new liver cells. And mallow, that common plant that grows everywhere in everybody's yard, is good for bronchitis, asthma, emphysema, getting rid of mucus. It helps the whole respiratory system, especially when you're suffering from colds. It also helps digestive problems like stomach ulcers and urinary tract swellings and inflammations. And plantain, it's one of the best things you can take for hay fever, allergies, asthma, even tuberculosis. It helps get rid of insect stings, which I got all the time, fevers, infections, skin disease, poison remedy, blood purifier. It's good for colitis, stomach aches, diarrhea, and my dad's prostate. If only we knew back then that this stuff that grew wild and free in our yard could have helped heal us of what we had. Oh, man, the world needs to know about this. And this stuff is right outside your door right now, and it's free. You will learn so much, and boy, will you feel the difference. So, what's the difference between wild foods and organic foods? Organic foods is usually grown in farm soil that's been used for the last 100 years, and there's very little nutrition left in that soil. And those farms are usually watered by municipal water, which usually has fluoride and chlorine in it, two of the most toxic substances known to man. And the plants are wimpy because they know they're going to get watered every day, so they don't have to try very hard to live. Their roots don't go very deep. Whereas wild plants, those weeds that grow in your sidewalk, they don't get watered every day. They have to survive. They're very tough. They grow roots sometimes literally hundreds of feet deep. Not just to get water. The more I learn about weeds, the more fascinated I am by them. Wherever man goes, weeds follow. What is the purpose of weeds? Well, wherever man goes, he messes up the soil. He compacts it, puts cement on it, he just destroys it. Weeds are like the commandos of the plant world. They come in wherever there's distressed soil. The first thing they do is they start spreading roots out everywhere. The top layer of roots starts breaking up the topsoil, and then they drop this really long, deep taproot, which goes literally hundreds of feet down into the ground and starts sucking up all that nutrition from deep, deep, deep in the ground, which fills the plant with saponins, sterols, alkaloids, glycosides, resins, minerals, trace minerals, and vitamins, and brings it all up to the top and starts spreading it out into the topsoil that it's breaking up, which starts regenerating the topsoil. And the plant itself is super rich in all these minerals. If you eat this plant, you're going to be getting 1,000 times the nutrition of what you would get from an organic plant grown on a farm. These wild plants are literally the superfood of the planet. And they're free. They don't cost anything. Matter of fact, they don't even need you. You need them.
I spent 13 years working in mainstream medicine, various modalities as an EMT, lab tech, phlebotomist, EKG tech, CNA, MA. So I did quite a few different things in medicine, but towards the end I really got kind of fed up with medicine. I found that they didn't really know what they were doing. There was a lot of simple things that I knew were curable that they weren't allowing cures for. There was a lot of things that I just felt were quackery. Charging people for things that they really shouldn't have been charging people for, like they'd run code on people that they shouldn't just to run up the bill. And so I got kind of disillusioned with medicine. Even simple things like, they don't address asthma properly. Asthma is an adrenal dysfunction where your adrenals aren't putting out sufficient levels of epinephrine and corticosteroids, but instead of addressing that adrenal dysfunction, they give you drugs like prednisone that will actually suppress your adrenals more and make you dependent on the drug. So anyways, all this combination of things really got me disillusioned with mainstream medicine. So a couple of years before I left mainstream medicine, I really started getting into alternative medicines, primarily herbs, and I started looking into radiofrequency therapy with the Rife units, and I got into ozone therapy, and I was finding that these things were working so much better than mainstream medicine. And not only did they work better, they were actually addressing the base cause of a lot of these diseases. So I decided finally to just let all my licenses go, and I went into alternative medicine. I've been there ever since. I've been doing this for about 18 years now. primarily working with herbs and ozone are my two absolute favorites. So this is why we decided to come up today and go through the lower desert all the way up to the mountains here and kind of see what's out there and some of the different herbs that are out that are medicinal or edible. And so we're up here in the beautiful mountains enjoying the weather and seeing what's out here. We're out here in the desert. We're going to go on a little tour. You know, this looks like, you know, it's desert. People generally associate the desert with being nothing out there. This is actually a very, very interesting place. The desert has a multitude of different plants with a lot of great different medicinal properties to it. A lot of food value out here. Desert really isn't as barren as people really think it is. So we're going to go on a little tour and see what some of the different plants are out here and what their medicinal uses are and what their food values are. This plant here is chaparral. It's also known as creosote bush or stinkweed. It's very easy to identify. It's got small green leaves that look like it's covered with resin. Once in bloom, it's got yellow flowers with little white seed pods. It has a very definitive smell to it. Once you've smelled it before, it's very easy to recognize. The part of the plant we use is the upper part of the plant. We use the leaves. The leaves are antiviral, antibacterial, antifungal. They raise vitamin C levels in the adrenal glands. They're a little bit of a painkiller. One of the best herbs really to know. I like to combine it with other herbs like with podarco. Podarco and chaparral work really well together as an antiviral type herb.
So this is like the #1 cancer plant, right?
They found studies at the University of Nevada and University of Utah that it will help to fight cancer cells through a couple different mechanisms. It contains a very, very powerful antioxidant called nordohydraguaic acid, or NDGA for short. NDGA works in both the lipid and the water portions of the cell, so it's a dual action antioxidant, but it has very powerful anti-tumor properties. And the chaparral, if you notice around the base, there's nothing growing around the base. That's because it contains what's called mitosis inhibitors. So it's kind of survival of the fittest, where the plants will poison the soil around them and it keeps other plants from growing. And this is done through mitosis inhibition, which basically prevents cells from being able to divide. So the chaparral will do that with cancer cells as well. It helps prevent those cancer cells from actually dividing. So you take the leaves, you want to dry them out. Make sure to age this for a couple of months before you use it. Very, very important. This has what's called president alkaloids in it, which are very toxic to the liver, but they oxidize after a couple of months of being dried. So once you take the leaves off and you dry them out, make sure you age it for a couple of months before you use it. I don't really recommend making a tea out of this because the resin will separate out, stick to the pan wall, you lose a lot of the active component. Best way to take it is to dry it out, grind it up. Usually I put it into a capsule or mix it with other herbs and just down it. That's the primary use for this one. This plant here is known as scarlet glow mallow. It's very common in the desert here in the lower elevations. It's very easily identified. The flowers are the biggest giveaway. I don't know of any other flowers in the area that have this color. The leaves are kind of a sandpapery type texture, looking something like a maple leaf. So it's very, very easy to identify. This one we use the upper part of the plant. The upper part of the plant is what they call mucilage. So you would basically dry it and you make a tea out of it. And when you let it cool, it's going to gel up a little bit. And that gel creates a very soothing compound for your throat, your sinuses, your bladder, your intestines. So it's for any type of irritation, like if you have a cold or bladder infection, things like that. You can also apply this to your hair. And if you leave it in the hair as it dries, it helps to curl the hair, especially if you go out into the sunlight. This plant here is a Yucca shadagra. Everything from this green crown down to here to the ground, that is called aerial root. Then there's also a root below. I tend not to use that root that's below because it tends to be full of rocks. But if you were to take off this outer bark, peel this off, take off the outer bark, and then there'll be a brown bark. You split off that outer bark, slice it really, really thin so it'll dry quick, because this is very hygroscopic. It holds moisture like a sponge. So you have to slice it real thin so it'll dry quick, otherwise it'll mold on you. This is a source of sterols and saponins. What these basically do, you got sterols will bind cholesterol. They help in the formation of your hormones through, from your adrenal glands. The yucca is also very high in resveratrol, which is anti-tumor, kind of one of the anti-aging things, type of phytoestrogen. The saponins in there will help to reduce inflammation. They're steroidal anti-inflammatories. They're great for things like ulcerative colitis, basically any type of intestinal inflammation, but also very commonly used for arthritis. It's a soap molecule. A lot of the Indians used to use it to help stimulate hair growth by using it topically as a shampoo. Those are some of the primary uses for this. The flowers are actually edible too. Right now there's no flowers on this one, but usually when it has the flowers, they are edible. I've tasted them before, not the best tasting in the world, but in an emergency situation, yes, they are edible. The leaves do have some saponins too, but not as much as the root. So what you really want is the aerial root. This is another type of yucca. It's known as, well, commonly known as a Joshua tree. Same properties. From that green crown down to the ground, that's aerial root. So again, you would want to sit there and take off this outer bark and use the inner part of the Joshua tree. Same properties as the other yucca. One of the properties I forgot to mention with the yucca plants is that they are anti-tumor. This actually will inhibit cancer through several different mechanisms. There are several studies in Medline about that, covering including the resveratrol's anti-tumor properties. Here we have a dead Joshua tree. So you kind of see, this would normally be very white. This is the part that you're going to use. You're going to cut off this outer bark, and you want to get to this inner part, which you're going to grind up and make a tea out of it, whatever. One of the use for this, it's really interesting when you find the dead ones like this. If you grind this up and you add it to your soil, very, very beneficial to the soil. This is like a natural sponge, so it's going to hold moisture. That's what these plants do, is they flower, they die. As they decompose, they'll spread out. They help hold moisture for the desert. There's also the sterols in there, which sterols are basically plant steroids helping to adapt to the stresses of this desert life. The high heat, the drought, the high winds, and so on. So I said, as this decomposes, all of this is going to sit there and go out here into the desert, and it's going to actually benefit all of these plants out here by helping to hold moisture for them and help them with the stresses of the life out here because of the steroids in there.
And talk about the shampoo real quick, that the Apaches used it or something.
Yeah, and in that case, it's this inner part again. You're going to cut off this outer bark. You want to take off this outer bark and get to this inner part, which is going to be very white. And that's what you're going to use. And again, you want to slice it real thin, kind of macerate it in water, and then you use that to wash your hair with. And the sterols in there help to stimulate hair growth. This plant here is known as skeleton rush. It looks a lot like Mormon tea. It's a very, very common mistake to mistake this with Mormon tea, but this will tend to grow at lower altitude than Mormon tea will. The other way to try to differentiate this between Mormon tea is see how it's more flexible. If I were to do this with Mormon tea, it would be snapping at the joints very easily. You can also taste it, and that's another big giveaway. Mormon tea has more of a tannic acid, like if you were tasting black tea, it has that kind of taste. Skeleton Rush has more of a bitter taste to it, so it's actually a little bit easier to identify through taste. This one was basically used for a wound wash. They would take the plant, grind it up again in water, and it was used as an eye wash, wound wash. This plant here is called Mormon tea. We kind of covered Skeleton Rush earlier. You can see how it looks somewhat the same. The Mormon tea tends to be a little bit greener than Skeleton Rush is more of a grayish color. It's going to grow at the higher elevations. It's about mid-desert. We start running into the junipers, as where we were seeing Skeleton Rush earlier, which looks a lot like it. Skeleton Rush will grow in the lower desert. This particular plant is a wonderful antihistamine and blood cleanser. You can either use the green tops, break them off. You want to make a tea out of them. Otherwise, my personal favorite is I collect the leaves when they've been broken off previously. They've been sun bleached out into a nice yellow, and this really mellows out the flavor, makes a wonderful tasting tea. I've been drinking this one since I was a little kid. Used to go collect it all the time in the ranch up in Reno. As you make the tea, you'll also find there'll be little tiny, the leaves are very, very small, and they're going to collect in the bottom. You can actually collect those. They make a wonderful astringent to stop bleeding. So again, primary use of this one is antihistamine, great for allergies, and it's also a great blood cleanser. This plant here is known as Indian pipe. These little bladders on here, they used to think that what was going on is that insects would bore in there and the plant would actually form this little bullous callus on there. They've since found that actually what these little bulbs are, they're carbon dioxide storage for the plants. So they'll actually absorb and store the carbon dioxide for later use. This plant is primarily used as a food source. The leaves down here are used as a little pot herb. So you just cook them very, very slightly and enjoy. Cactus you gotta be really careful with. Well, one, of course, you got the very fine spines on there. The other thing you gotta watch for is you gotta be careful not to actually swallow the cactus itself in a situation like a survival situation, because it can suck a lot of the moisture from your body as well. You want the moisture from it. In an emergency situation, if you know how to make a still, basically digging a hole in the ground, if you have a piece of plastic and a cup, put the cup down at the bottom, you can take your cactus, kind of chop it up a little bit, put it around there, take your plastic, spread it over, weight it down around the edges, put a rock in the center so it cones down. As the water comes off the cactus, it will condense on the plastic, flow to the center, and drip down to the cup, so you can use that in an emergency situation. The other real use for cactus, if you're real careful and you kind of scrape the spines off first with a rock, or if you got a knife, you can slice the pad open, you can put it onto wounds as a poultice, makes a very good poultice. But again, you got to wash these spines, you don't want to end up with more problems than you started with. This plant here is called prickly poppy for a good reason. You want to be careful handling it. It's a good idea to have gloves on if you're going to be handling it. The upper part of the plant here, if you were to break it open, it has a latex. That latex can be applied to warts, moles, skin cancers to help eat them away. Or you can take the upper part of the plant, you can crush it and dry it, and it makes a mild sedative because it contains a very, very trace amount of opium, just enough to kind of take the edge off. So it's kind of a relaxant, kind of like the other poppies. Red poppy is often used for sleep. This will actually do the same trick. This is Encelia. Encelia is used primarily as a very mild painkiller. You can use it for toothache or arthritic pains. Slightly bitter, it's mild analgesic. This one is called the Scoba de la Vibora, Scoba for short. Scoba is really good for arthritic pains again. What you're going to do is take the upper part of the plant, you want to make a tea out of it, add it to your bath water, and then you soak in the bath water, and this is really good for taking out the aches and pains of arthritis. This little low-growing plant here is called crane's bill. It gets its name from its little seed heads here. As you can see, they look like a stork or crane's bill, very long tapered here. It's also known as wild geranium, and this one you're going to dig up the roots, and you want the roots to use as an astringent, so it's going to tighten up the tissues. Desert sage. This one's a very powerful antiseptic. It's going to kill viruses, bacteria, fungus. It's a very, very bitter tasting plant, so wonderful for digestion. I'm sure most of you have heard of black salve before. The original black salve, before white man came along and started messing around with it, was actually made from baby sagebrush leaves. They would take the baby sagebrush leaves, boil it up into a very, very strong tea, and they'd condense it down so all that was left was this black goo. That was the original black salve. So this one here is going to be used as a digestive aid because of the bitterness, if it hits your tongue. It's also going to be good for things like gallstones, again, because it is a bitter, and it's a very powerful antiseptic for viruses, bacteria, fungus. You can use this for smudging as well, for those of you that know what smudging is. It doesn't smell quite as nice as white sage, but it will still do the trick.
What did black salve do?
Black salve is primarily used as an anti-tumor agent. It's applied to the tumors to help draw the tumors up and kill them.
Very powerful stuff.
This is pitch off of a pine tree. Pitch is actually the resin that when the pine tree is injured, it'll secrete this resin. It's primarily used as an antiseptic, again, expectorant. You can chew small pieces and swallow it to help get phlegm up out of the lungs. I've used it as a glue before as well. You can dissolve it, if you want to purify it, I dissolve it in alcohol and then strain it out, add it to water, and the resin will separate out from the water. It's a very easy way to use it. It's also said the Indians use it for a glue for arrows and so on and so forth, Indian crafts. Wonderful stuff, very, very sticky, kind of hard to get off the skin if you get it on your skin. You can use oils or butter or something like that. It was the way we used to take it off our hands as a kid.
Is it used as a band-aid, or?
You could use it to glue together a wound, which would also, because it acts as an antiseptic due to the oils that are in there. There's some very strong antiseptic oils. So yeah, it theoretically could be used to glue a small wound together and keep it sterile. The leaves of the pine tree, or needles as we call them here, the needles, one of the interesting facts about them is they're actually extremely rich in vitamin C. They got about 300 times more vitamin C than oranges do. They also contain some turpentine and some other chemical compounds like that, which work really, really good for respiratory infections. So you have a case of pneumonia, bronchitis, things like that. Pine needles are excellent for that. A lot of the settlers, when they were coming through, moving west, during times when they couldn't find any other sources of food, they would strip off this outer bark, and the inner bark would actually be used as a food source. Not the most nutritious in the world, but it's an emergency situation, it is edible. Moss is really good for packing wounds. It helps to coagulate the blood, so if you cut yourself, you can actually peel this up and you can apply it to the wound to help staunch the bleeding, act kind of like a natural band-aid. These are juniper berries. Actually use the leaves and the berries in this case. As we can see, these berries aren't quite ripe. They're actually going to be more of a blue color when they get done. And you don't want to be eating them when they're still green like this. You want to wait till they're fully ripe and they get more of a purple color to them. When they're younger like this, they have a very high essential oil content, which is great topically if you need an antiseptic, but if you take them internally, the high oil content can cause kidney damage. So you want to make sure that they're ripened so that the oil content's decreased. When these are ripe, it's usually in the fall is when I like to collect them. And you take the berries, I usually just smash them and swallow them. They're good for digestion because they'll kick up your stomach acidity, which will help cut down acid reflux, GERD. The other thing I like them for, and these really did wonders for me, back when I was 26, I got the measles, lost my vision. I was taking juniper berries, brought back my vision to 100% after about a week. The juniper berries will actually strengthen the optic nerve. So one thing you do have to be careful with though is also lower your blood sugar. They have an insulin-like compound in there and they will drop your blood sugar rather drastically, so don't go overboard. Usually I take about 5 berries at a time, so I'd smash them with a hammer and kind of swallow them. The leaf part, I save the leaves too when I collect the berries, and my favorite use of leaves is to make a tea out of them when I have a sore throat and I gargle with it, and it will kill the bacteria inside the throat and stop the sore throat.
So it's good for diabetics.
Yeah, you use the juniper berries for that reason. Again, small doses. Even though it will lower blood sugar, you still got to watch the kidneys, so you got to be careful on how much you actually take.
So don't get them when they're white, get them when...
Yeah, so like with these especially, you can see how green they are. Those are really bad. You don't want to take it unless you use externally, because the high oil content, very powerful antiseptic. If you have like ringworm, nail fungus, things like that, yes, this is great. If you're going to be using it internally for medicinal purposes, you want to wait till these actually turn to a nice dark purple. And there's also the pitch again. You can see there's pitch here in the corner. And again, you can use the pitch to help, as an expectorant to clean your lungs out. Just kind of chew it up and swallow it. Not the best tasting thing in the world, but it does the trick. This is kind of the color you're looking for in the juniper berries. It's going to be a powdery purple in the fall. These are kind of old. They've been sitting for a while, so they're kind of brown on the other side. But when they're ripe, they'll have this powdery purple color on them, and that's what you're looking for to know if they're ripe. On this side, we have a plant called silk tassel. Silk tassel, and we got manzanita over here right next to it. The reason I'm bringing this up with these two close together is you can see they're very, very similar looking plants. The way we're going to tell the difference is with silk tassel, when they have the little catkins on there, that's one of the big giveaways. And also if you look at the bark is more of a woody color, as where if you look at the manzanita has actually a red color to the bark. So it's the easiest way to identify the two of them. So starting with the silk tassel is a very strong, smooth muscle relaxant, and it's extremely bitter. So if you're not really into bitter taste, you might want to cap this up. It is very difficult to grind though. The leaves are very leathery. I've even tried grinding them up in a Vitamix before. Really tough to do. Usually I have to grind it and I put it through a sifter, and then I grind it and sift it and get down to whatever it's not going to grind, just ends up going into the compost pile. Anyway, this contains an alkaloid called guaranine. Guaranine is the actual active component that acts as a smooth muscle relaxant. Where you want smooth muscle relaxants are things like if you want to drop the blood pressure, it's going to relax the blood vessels, dropping the blood pressure. This is actually one of the best herbs out there too for if you have menstrual cramps. The leaves are the part I prefer. The leaves are the weakest part of the plant. On a scale of 1 to 10, this would be a 1. The bark itself is going to be a 4. The root bark is going to be a scale of 10. Well, you don't want it super, super strong because again, it will affect blood pressure. So generally I go with the leaves, are the part that I use. So you want to collect them, dry them, grind them up, and if you can handle the bitter taste, you can make a tea out of it. Otherwise, it's best to sift out the powder and then you can cap it up. 1 capsule, I had a friend who had really severe menstrual cramps. I used to make this up for. 1 capsule would knock out had her menstrual cramps for about 10 hours. So it's a very, very powerful smooth muscle relaxant, fantastic for menstrual cramps. Theoretically, it should work for diarrhea too for the same exact reasons, being a smooth muscle relaxant. On the other hand, we got manzanita over here. Now, manzanita is for urinary tract infections. What you want to do here is you take the leaves again. The leaves contain 16 glycones, which is basically a hydroquinone bound to a glucose molecule. What's unique about this is that these glycones stay intact until they hit your kidneys, then they split, releasing the hydroquinone, which is your antiseptic, and that's going to kill your urinary tract infection. So it's very, very specific to the urinary tract. It's not going to cause secondary infections the way antibiotics will kill off the good bacteria. This doesn't. This is very, very specific to the urinary tract. So what you want to do is take the leaves, dry them out, you make a tea out of it. Now these hydroquinones work best in alkaline environments, so you need to alkalize the urine. So it's a good idea to take it with either a little bit of baking soda, or you can use some calcium citrate, take it at the same time. You drink a cup of tea 3 to 4 times a day. It will clear up urinary tract infections usually within a 2 to 3 day period.
So how do you suggest people prepare it again?
You take the leaves, dry them out, and then you make a tea out of it. And you want to drink about 3 to 4 cups of the tea a day, and make sure to take it with either a little baking soda or a little calcium citrate to alkalize the urine.
When you dry it out, what do you mean?
You'll take the leaves off, so separate the leaves. I can lay them out on a flat piece of paper and just let them dry for a couple of weeks. What that does, it helps the walls to crack so that it's going to release the active constituents. If you use the leaves intact, with the cell walls intact, you're really not going to extract much out of it. That's true of most herbs. Like if you take mint leaves, for example, you try to make a tea out of fresh mint leaves, you're not going to get any flavor. If you dry them or freeze them first, that cracks the cell walls and will help to release the constituents. So if you're in a rush, you can always put this in a freezer, and that will crack the cell walls in about a half an hour to an hour, and then you can go ahead and make your tea out of it. Otherwise, just put some out to dry and then store it in a glass container after it's dry and have it ready.
What if you just throw it in Vitamix?
You can do that too. It's not going to crack the cell walls very well. You still want to freeze it because the ice crystals will crack the cell walls more efficiently. Vitamix will crack some cell walls, but not all of them.
But it'll still work, right?
Yeah.
I mean, like nobody, if you have a UTI, you don't want to wait 2 weeks to...
Yeah, well, as I was saying, the freezer is the other alternative. Put them in the freezer for half an hour. There's also an herb you buy in health food stores that's very similar. It's called uva ursi. And uva ursi is a relative of manzanita, but uva ursi only has 2 glycones. This has 16. So manzanita is actually quite a bit stronger. The flowers on here will eventually end up forming berries as well, and the berries can be ground up and they can be eaten. A lot of times they're actually baked into apple pies and stuff for a little tangy flavor. So the berries on this are edible. This plant here is called figwort. It's got real thick leaves, alternate on each side, kind of ragged on the edges, and it's going to be this way all the way up the plant. The flowers, when it's actually in bloom, have a real sweet scent to them and look kind of like a foxglove flower. Plant, basically here what you want to use, the upper part of the plant is used for skin infections. So you can take the plant and dry it out, and you can apply it to psoriasis, eczema, dermatitis, different skin afflictions like that. Works really, really well for those. The roots of a lot of the species are actually collected, dried out, and when they dry they turn almost black. It's supposed to be very, very sweet, and they're a substitute for ginseng. Depends a lot on the time of year you're out here as to what you're going to find that's edible.
There's all kinds of bushes around here. Is there anything that you can't eat? I mean, can you just start munching on something and...
Pretty much. I haven't really seen much up here that's going to be poisonous. Most of the plants we've been looking at are definitely medicinal. Most of them are going to taste really nasty though. It says silk tassel, chaparral in particular. They're both very, very bitter tasting. Manzanita is very astringent, same with Mormon tea. It has a tannic acid flavor to it, so it's going to taste like black tea, like a very strong black tea.
But the more bitter something is, the better it is for you.
Right. Bitters will help digestion, stimulate bile formation.
So everything that I'm filming here, so you could just start munching on it.
Pretty much, yeah. I don't see anything in the vicinity that's poisonous.
Is there something that people can do to test to see if it's poisonous, like eat one leaf and wait an hour or something, or?
Unfortunately, a lot of plants, if they are poisonous, a lot of times it doesn't take a whole lot to kill you. Like, say, oleander, for example, you take one leaf and you chew on it, you'll be dead in about 15-20 seconds, so I guess you'll know pretty quick that one's poisonous.
Is there a way to test something so people will know that without having a field guide book or something?
And it's a really good idea to learn the plants rather than experiment, because like I said, every once in a while you will run across plants that are poisonous.
But most of them are not, right?
Yeah, most of what we've seen up here, the wild plants we've seen up here, I haven't seen anything poisonous yet.
So it's like 99% is okay.
Right, just mostly nasty tasting.
Right.
Talk about the difference between the stuff that grows in the wild and how much harder it is than the organic stuff that you buy in the store. And
yeah, a lot of people ask me, you know, if I make herbal formulations, a lot of people ask me, do you use organic herbs? And really, I don't like organic herbs. I actually prefer wild crafted whenever possible. Wild crafted basically means we go out here in nature and we get the herbs that we need from nature. The big difference between organic and wild crafted, well, first of all, organic's not as clean as people think it is. If they really stop to think about it, most organic farms are irrigated with surface water. That surface water is coming down from the mountains. It's passing all sorts of cities and farms. It's picking up a lot of pollutants that go into the soil. The plants pick it up. So it's not really as clean as people think it is. The second thing is the plants are more coddled on an organic farm, and they're not being stressed out. Stressing the plants actually increases a lot of their active constituents. Like if you want to make a hot pepper really hot, for example, let's say you're growing some cayenne pepper. If you want to make those peppers hotter, you actually have to stress them out. So you withhold their water until they start to wilt, and then you water them, perk them back up, they start to wilt again, you water them. Those stresses cause them to concentrate their essential oils inside the pepper, make a much hotter pepper. Same thing with watermelons. If you let the watermelon kind of wilt a little bit, then water it, and wilt and water, it'll concentrate its sugars. So out in nature, these plants are being exposed to drought, they're being exposed to high temperatures, very low temperatures, high winds, insect attack. All these different things, these different stresses cause these plants to produce more of their phytochemicals, which are the active components that we're actually after. So you're going to find that the wild-crafted plants are not only cleaner than organic plants, but they're actually much stronger.
so it's very possible that the weeds that are growing in people's yards are better than what's growing in their gardens.
Right. Yeah, the weeds, just make sure that nobody's been spraying them, or that you're not spraying around your yard. Make sure the dogs aren't going on them. But yeah, the weeds, again, are in the same boat. You know, they're not being coddled and stuff the way a lot of the garden plants will be. You kind of let them go on their own, and they're having to fight for the water. They're going to have to fight for protection from insect attack. So they do tend to be a lot stronger.
What if an animal does urinate on a plant? I mean, can't you just
rinse it off? If you know that you've been urinating on, let's say your dandelions or whatever, just rinse them off.
With what?
I would just use plain old water, but rinse them off a couple of times. You know, the dog's not going to urinate them on it every day, so just kind of rinse them off a couple days in a row, whatever. And then you also want to pick your plants preferably first thing in the morning. That's when they tend to be a little bit stronger than throughout the day. Some plants you also want to pick before they flower. Again, it's individually with the plants. So you're really going to have to learn your plants and find out when the best time to collect them. Because some you want them when they are flowering, others you want before they flower. So most of them you're going to collect first thing in the morning is the best time to collect them. But each plant's a little bit different, so again, you have to learn your plants.
I read that, or heard that if you spritz hydrogen peroxide on the plants, that animals won't go near them. And they're sterilized too, and that doesn't hurt the plant.
Well, peroxides are naturally found in rainwater. When we have lightning storms, for example, the lightning will generate ozone. As the rain comes down, the water is going to react with the ozone in the atmosphere, and it's going to generate peroxides. And so plants do use peroxides actually from nature, and again, it's a natural disinfectant. It helps to keep the plants nice and strong. I've never heard about keeping animals away with it, but it's definitely beneficial to the plants. In fact, a lot of people will take dilute amounts of peroxide, add it to their water they water their plants with for that same reason.
And if they're worried about the cooties from the animal urine, at least it'll sterilize the plant.
Yeah, so if you just rinse it off anyway, I mean, the urine's pretty water soluble. It's a nitrogen source for the plants. The biggest drawback to like dog urine on the plants is it tends to be very high in sodium, and that can kill off some of your plants. So that you do have to kind of watch for. It's a lot of fun to be able to come out and, you know, pick your own medicine. You know, there's a big misconception that herbs are much slower than pharmaceutical medications, or they're weaker than pharmaceutical medications. Really, that's not the case. A lot of the herbs they found are actually not only more effective than pharmaceutical medications, but they actually work faster. Like they found ginger, for example, was found to work better than Dramamine in preventing motion sickness. And again, we looked at manzanita earlier. Manzanita is actually more effective than the antibiotics in killing off urinary tract infections and doesn't cause secondary urinary tract infections. So really learning the plants, I mean, we've got a whole pharmacy all around us, no matter where you go. You can be in the middle of the desert, you can be up here in the mountains, you can be down by the ocean, you can pretty much anywhere you grow. All plants, every single plant has phytochemicals in it. It produces these phytochemicals again to adapt to the stresses of nature, including insect attack. So they're going to produce these various compounds, alkaloids, saponins, glycosides, terpenes. Those are all medicinal properties to all those compounds.
So you were in the medical field. You pretty much know everything that the doctors out there know. You have a friend that has cancer. What would you say? What would you suggest?
First thing I do is I find out what the cancer is, how advanced it is. Those are going to be very big factors. In early cancers, there's a lot of herbs that will slow down or stop cancers. Yucca, chaparral. Depending on the cancer, I might also go chaparral, palo d'arco, and agraphis mixed together, like for leukemias and lymphomas, as opposed to tissue cancers. But if they have really aggressive cancer, let's say they've got late stage liver cancer, or small cell lung carcinoma, I actually prefer ozone therapy. Ozone therapy is one of the most effective cancer therapies I've found so far.
But what goes in your mouth?
As far as the mouth goes, again, you want to cut out the junk food, definitely. Stimulants like caffeine, because that's going to weaken your immune system. As far as directly fighting the cancer, you want to attack the cancer from different mechanisms. For instance, you can use chaparral to kill cancer viruses, bacteria, fungus, because you'll find that most of your cancers, including the so-called genetic cancers, are actually caused from viruses. So you want full-range antimicrobials, you want to inhibit mitosis of the cancer cells. Again, chaparral is very effective for that. Yucca contains resveratrol, which is a phytoestrogen, which counters a lot of the stronger estrogens that can accelerate the growth of cancers. There's herbs that will block angiogenesis, which basically is what the cancer cells use to tap into your primary blood supply and feed itself. You can use herbs like nettle leaf to block the lactic acid cycle, which in essence starves out the cancer cells. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to attack the cancer from multiple directions. You don't do it from a singular direction. So combinations of herbs work much better, especially when you work them synergistically, like chaparral, red clover mixed together, very, very powerful. Or chaparral, palo d'arco mixed together for blood cancers like leukemias and lymphomas is very powerful. Another one I like is mixing poke root with amla berry. And amla berry raises your SOD levels about 80%. The poke root is a substitute for interferons, because the body produces a series of interferons, each interferon specific to the tissue it's derived from, as where poke root has a structural similarity to interferon, but not tissue specific. So what it will do is it will stimulate the SOD to form hydrogen peroxide, which activates your white blood cells. So we're basically stimulating the immune system indirectly.
So coming from the medical field, it sounds like you're pretty much going the herbal route to for the most dangerous healing, for the most important, life-threatening
aggressive diseases and stuff. Yeah, mainstream medicine, I mean, look at how long we've had cancer around, look how long mainstream medicine's been around. They've really made no serious advancements in cancer. In fact, they've done more to suppress cancer cures than they have to promote them. I know it sounds odd, but if you look at, like interleukin-2 is a great example. Interleukin-2 was studied for 25 years before it hit the market. No side effects to it, very, very effective cancer treatment. It hits the market, hailed as a new cancer cure of the century. All of a sudden the FDA comes out and says, oh, it causes heart attacks, we got to get it off the market. They don't care about finding a cancer cure. We've had podophyllum toxins been around since probably the 1950s at least, and it's been a long time coming, but they finally got it on the market as an isolate. When it first came out, it was coming from savin junipers and from mandrake root, but they had no way to synthesize it until probably about 10-12 years ago. Then they finally synthesized it. The University of North Carolina sold it to a California drug company as a chemotherapy drug. But what's interesting though is if you go back and you look in the medical journals from 1950 and look up podophyllum toxin, you're going to find that they found it effective against 6 different forms of cancer, including breast cancer. Yet they shelved it. because they had no way to synthesize it, so there was no money making off of it.
And that's what it boils down to, is that these cancer cures are all coming from these plants, and the only reason they are, I mean, unless they can patent it into something that's synthesized. But the bottom line is you can get the same effect or better from the actual plant.
Right.
Forget the drug, forget the chemicals and the doctors.
Yeah, most drugs that we have on the market today are either made directly from herbs or based on their chemistry. And what's really interesting is that the average survival rate for chemotherapy is actually less than 3% on average. There are a few exceptions. If you look at leukemias, lymphomas, there is a higher success rate. It's roughly about 70–80% success rate with leukemias and lymphomas. But the treatment for leukemias and lymphomas, when the primary drugs they use are vincristine and vinblastine, which are derived from a plant. It comes from Madagascar periwinkle.
So you have chaparral powder. Okay, how much do you take a day?
Well, again, I prefer to mix it. I don't take herbs individually in most cases because you need the potentiating effects of the other herbs. Again, chaparral, powdarco work really well together. Chaparral, red clover work really well together. If you're using something, let's say, Coleus fuscoli raises cyclic adenosine monophosphate levels, stop asthma attacks, burns body fat, and so on and so forth. But cyclic AMP's broken down fairly quick, so you want to add herbs that are going to block the breakdown of the cyclic AMP to prolong the effect. So like watercress can be added, nettle can be added. So you want herbs that are going to work together synergistically. You make blends, don't use individual herbs in most cases.
But how much do you take? Like, just give a rough idea. Do you like?
Well, I tend to use powders, and then once I mix a formula together, most of the time the recommended dose is about a half a teaspoon 3 times a day, empty stomach. You want to take it at least 20 minutes before meals, because fats and proteins can block the absorption of a lot of compounds.
Can you take too much? Like if you took like a couple tablespoons instead of a couple of teaspoons?
Depends a lot on the herb. There are a lot of herbs that I use that can be potentially toxic. Lobelia can make you vomit if you take too much of it. It can paralyze the respiratory muscles in higher doses. That's actually why there's a vomit mechanism, why it makes you vomit. But let's say if you took ginger with it and you're suppressing the vomit centers in the brain with ginger at the same time you're taking lobelia, then theoretically it could stop your respiratory muscles. Poke root can be poisonous in higher doses. There's plants like oleander, foxglove, the cardiac glycoside sources. Depending on the plant, the strength of the cardiac glycoside varies a lot. There's very mild cardiac glycosides like squill. Lily of the Valley is really not that strong. Cactus grandiflorus isn't that strong. Then you start getting to the real strong ones like foxglove and oleander, which can be quite lethal even in small doses. So it's going to depend again a lot on the plant. But for most of the plants you're going to, the average plants you're going to get in the store or whatever, your average dose is going to be half a teaspoon 3 times a day of a powder. But as I said, you want to do it as a blend. Particularly, like, you don't want to go take a half a teaspoon of Cascara sagrada or senna, for example. That's going to be pretty harsh laxative. So yeah, you do want to kind of watch those.
Yeah, but it's not going to kill you. It just your body will get rid of it because it's.
Yeah, it can double you over in cramps and things like that. It's not,
yeah,
be a little careful. And there are certain herbs that can drop blood pressure pretty drastically, and somebody's already got low blood pressure, they got to kind of watch that. Or things will drop your blood sugar. Like, if you took a straight half teaspoon of, said, fresh juniper berries, you can overdrop your blood sugar.
Yeah.
So again, blends actually kind of balance that out, make it a little bit safer to take. Now this plant here is Lomatium. It's kind of early in the year to really identify it very easily. Once it gets a little bit older later into the year, it's going to have a very tall seed stalk that has a particular seed. If you've seen like fennel seeds and stuff like that, it's actually what it kind of looks like. This one, you use the root. It's sold in the health food stores under the name LDM 100, and the root's the part that's used. Very powerful antiviral, antibacterial, antifungal. So what you want to do is take the roots. This one I usually cut up. I actually do tincture this one, but you can just grind it up and take it as a powder as well. Right behind it here is actually a thistle. It's not very old again, but the thistles are really good for the liver. You can use the leaves here. You can I'd cut the spines off a little bit and cook them up a little bit, and you can eat the leaves, you can use the roots, but again, very, very good for the liver. Another wonderful resource on pine trees or pine cones. When we were little kids, my dad lives at a ranch up in Reno, so we spent a lot of time up there and they're in the pines. So one of the things we used to do is we used to go out and collect pine cones when they were still closed. The animals would gnaw them off the trees and they'd still be closed like this. This one was actually open, I should say, but we'd take them when they're closed, All our tricks we do is we'd wrap them up in aluminum foil, put them in the fireplace so the heat would open them up, and we take the seeds and you crack the shell off the seed and we'd eat the seeds on the inside. Sometimes you can find them when they're partially open. You'll still find some seeds on the inside. We can pluck them out as well. Anyways, another really good source of food is if you find some pine cones still have the seeds in them. The seeds are actually quite delicious. Hey, this is alfalfa. You'll find it grown wild actually quite a few places. Alfalfa is extremely nutritious. It has a root system that goes down generally about 100 feet, so it can reach nutrients that other plants generally can't reach. I like to take the upper part of the plant, again dry it, grind it up for its nutritional value. They refer to it as the land version of kelp because of its high mineral content. Well, we're visiting my front yard and some of the different weeds are growing in my front yard. This is actually a plant called horehound. Kind of surprised it popped up in my yard because it usually doesn't grow at this altitude. Horehound, I'm sure you might have heard of it. You hear them at horehound candy. It's usually an expectorant to help clean up your lungs. And this is what it's made from, is this particular plant. It's actually in the mint family. This little plant down here is actually going to get much bigger. This is called purslane. Some people call it pusley. In this country they consider it a weed, in the rest of the world it's actually considered a vegetable. It's your highest durable source of omega-3 fatty acids you're going to find. It's extremely rich in vitamin C. It's a little bit of a mucilage. It does have some oxalic acid in there, so you don't want to go overboard on eating it, but it's very delicious. You can either eat it raw, chop it up, put it on your salads or whatever. The other thing you can do is I like to take a little bit of water, steam it for about 15 seconds, put some butter, salt, and pepper on it, and it's really, really delicious. And so these plants will keep spreading and they'll get actually very large. They can be a little invasive, so you want to keep it, pulled back a little bit. They'll drop out 50,000 seeds at one time. So usually I'll leave like 2 or 3 plants to grow and reseed, and the rest of them I get, I pull them up and I either eat them or I feed them to my fish. And anyways, very nutritious, very heart healthy, and delicious. And again, this is scarlet globe mallow that we were looking at up on the mountain. It's a very common desert plant, especially along the sides of the road. You can tell the orange flowers are the giveaway to it. And again, we use this as a mucilage. So you take the upper part of the plant, you make a tea out of it, and it will coat and soothe your mucous membranes, your throat, your sinuses. If you have bladder irritation, colon irritation, anything like that, this acts as a mucilage to help to soothe all those parts. And if you apply the tea to your hair and you let it dry in your hair, it helps to curl the hair. Right behind it we have another mallow plant here. This is called common mallow, low mallow, cheese mallow. Again, it's going to get much larger, and this plant also is used in the same manner. You take the upper part of the plant, made a tea out of it, and it's used as a mucilage to help soothe the membranes. The root on this one is also used as a substitute for ginseng. So you can dig the roots up, chop them up, and make them a tea. So it's a substitute for regular ginseng. My neighbor here has a rose tree. Roses are actually edible too. You can take the petals. The flavor varies a lot. I've had different roses before, and each one has a much different flavor, so it depends. You have to kind of taste each one and see which ones you like. Anyways, the petals can be added to salads for a little decoration, a little flavor, and then eventually they will form the rose hips. And the rose hips are where the vitamin C, riboflavin's at, so there's also benefits in the hips once these actually drop off and leave behind. In fact, I think there's, well, yeah, you get the little hip.
That's the berry, right?
Yeah, so the little hip right there behind where the blossom is, and eventually this is going to enlarge, and then you can use that for a vitamin C source, riboflavin source.
Can you eat the leaves?
Never heard anything about the leaves. It's usually the flower petals and the rose hips are the primary areas that are going to be used. This particular plant here, you're not going to use. This is very, very poisonous. The reason I want to bring this up is this is also a juniper, but this is called savin juniper. And savin junipers contain protophyllum toxin, which is very, very poisonous. So just because it's a juniper doesn't necessarily mean that's medicinal. So if you're going to collect juniper berries, make sure you know which ones you're dealing with.
It's just a decorative tree that's on most houses.
Right, but it is still a juniper. It's just it's the poisonous variety. And over here at my other neighbor, it's pretty neat. They built a trellis going across, and they've got grapevines running across the trellis here. That you can see the beginning of some grapes along here. The trick with dealing with grapes, if you want to get the real large plump grapes, there's actually a growth hormone called gibberellic acid. It's produced by a fungus, also found in some seaweeds, but you can buy it commercially, and you paint a little bit of gibberellic acid onto the plant, wait for about 3 days, paint it onto the leaf again, and it'll cause those grapes to enlarge. That's how you get those big, plump, thick, juicy grapes at the grocery store. They actually use this gibberellic acid, this growth hormone. And over here we got a pomegranate tree going. You can see the flowers right now, and they're starting, just barely starting the fruits in behind them. Pomegranates are fantastic antioxidants.
All kinds of fruit on that thing.
Yeah, I love fresh dates. They're delicious. This is prickly lettuce.
Prickly lettuce?
Yeah, it's called prickly lettuce. When you break the plant open, you'll see there's a little bit of a white latex in there. You can take this white latex and you can apply it to warts, moles, skin cancers, things like that. It helps to eat them off. The plant itself, this actually has, again, a trace amount of opium in it, so it acts as a mild sedative. So you can harvest the plant, dry it, crush it, and you can use it as a sedative.
People are supposed to eat dandelions. You mean just the leaves?
Yeah, usually the leaves, the roots, the flowers. If you pinch that bitter calyx off the back, the flower itself is very high in lecithin. It's in fact considerably higher in lecithin than soy.
Wow.
And then you have the seeds are antibiotics, so the whole dandelion actually has purposes to it. This is oxalis right here. It's kind of small, so it's hard to see. Actually, it looks like a little clover in a way. But oxalis, if you were to take it and chew on it, it actually has a kind of a lemony flavor to it because the oxalic acid in there. So it is actually used for seasoning. You can put it on fish and whatever. You don't want to consume too much of it because the oxalic acid is very hard on the kidneys and it binds calcium, forms calcium oxalate, which is insoluble. So you don't want to eat a whole lot of this one. Well, actually up here we have an olive tree. And olive leaf initially was actually used more as a sedative than it was for an antiviral. Then somebody figured out it was antiviral, antibacterial. We have olive trees pretty much all over the place, so that's another good one. The fruits themselves, you have to go through a long process to really make them edible, so unless you got a lot of time and energy, I wouldn't even bother with those, but the leaves are definitely good. Down towards the base of the tree, we've got periwinkle growing. Periwinkle is a very, very powerful vasodilator for the brain, so it helps to increase blood flow to the brain, increases ATP in the brain tissue, which is adenosine triphosphate, helps the cells to function properly. So it's one of the best memory boosters out there, and also they found it helps prevent stroke damage, post-stroke and stuff by increasing the circulation, keeping down the enzymes. Very good herb to know. You don't want to take it by itself though. It is very constipating because it dries up the tissues, so it's good to be blended in with other herbs. And down here towards the end of the street, we've got mulberry tree. You can get fruiting mulberries and you can get non-fruiting mulberries. If you can get the fruiting mulberries, the fruit's really, really delicious. I remember collecting them when I was a little kid and walking home from school. I used to go a long way around just because there's a mulberry tree there. You used to always have fruit on it. I'd go pick the fruits off. Really delicious fruit. Anyway, other properties, you can use the bark as a laxative on the mulberry tree, and the leaves themselves are an amylase inhibitor, so they block the breakdown of carbohydrates into simple sugars. So they actually act as a diet type aid by preventing you from absorbing the carbohydrates.
That's prickly lettuce.
Yeah, everything over here is all prickly lettuce. So, they said these herbs have our medicine, everything we need to keep ourselves healthy and to fight disease and stuff. It's right out here in nature. It's just a matter of you gotta learn what's what.